Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, who always so graciously agrees to give way, probably because she knows that the wisdom should come best towards the end of the debate rather than the beginning, and she gives us younger members an opportunity to stretch our legs a little bit. Sir, I rise to make a brief intervention with respect to this amendments to this Transport Authority Act, Cap 295A. And I wish to start from the place of understanding the mischief that the Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast and her team in the ministry is trying to cure with these amendments. I think that this is a government that has shown that we are serious, though not perfect, and that this is a government that listens and seeks to respond in particular to address what I call the day-to-day nuisances that people experience. I think that we all see on the road every day and experience the behaviors that this amendment is seeking to address. I know in particular the mischief that the Honourable Member referenced in terms of PSV trying to secure a particular position in the line on the road on a route. We've all experienced it, and many of us have had the misfortune of being behind them in this strategy and being unwitting participants in this strategy because there is a strategy. There's a strategy with respect to how the workers who provide this service feel that they can best maximize revenue. That's what they're seeking to do. So I understand a lot of the behavioral and regulatory issues that we are trying to address, and I agree that we should, in the proper way, address them. But sir, I wish to start from perhaps a more overarching perspective on this matter of public transport. And it's not quite a year ago, perhaps in September of last year, that I did have the occasion to share some thoughts in another place on this business of public transport in Barbados and the extent to which it requires us to have a whole of sector approach and a first principles approach. The first principles approach is what is the service that we consider that the public should have access to with respect to transport. What is the public utility service of the transport sector that we wish to have the public have access to? And when I say the public, I mean 100% of Barbadians. I mean 100% of Barbadians, because I mean the wherewithal for the Honourable Member for St. Andrew, for example, to leave his car home and to decide that he is going to take a bus to be able to get to where he needs to get for the day. When I talk about the level of service that we want 100% of the public to be able to access, I'm talking about the move away from a dependence on fossil fuels towards the greening of the sector and what that really means for how we transform the sector. Because what we do know is that being able to have this clean transition in the transport sector is going to mean more than just transitioning to electric vehicles. It is also going to mean that we have fewer vehicles, period, on the road. It is going to mean a decline in consumption when it comes to private cars driving on the road. An increase in productivity for Barbados as a whole is also going to mean less traffic congestion. So what do we have so far? We know that in the access to public transport as a utility, we're trying to achieve a few things. We're trying to have a transition to clean energy. We're trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We're trying to have a lower reliance on fossil fuels so that our fuel import bill is lower. And we're trying to have an increase in productivity of every Barbadian. And what do I mean by that? Sir, whether you are taking a ZR or a yellow bus or a transport board bus or some other vehicle, whether you are driving your car or being driven, whether you are walking, the time that it takes you to get from home to where you're going, the nature of that journey, how stressful it is, how long it takes, all of that determines your productivity when you arrive at your destination. If you have a business that relies on moving things around, your bottom line is affected by how long your vehicles, whether you're doing freighting, whether you run a construction company and you're moving steel around, whether you're moving sand, all of that is impacted or impacts your bottom line at the end of the day. It impacts how many people you can employ, how many laborers, how many steel benders, how many tilers, how many masons. This is a circle. And so when we talk about addressing issues in the transport sector, these are the things we're addressing. We're addressing traffic flow and traffic congestion. We have to. We're addressing whether people feel comfortable that we have a transport sector and a delivery of public transport that we all can take. I've said in this honorable place before, sir, that we should not be creating sectors for poor people. We should not be creating services for poor people, because if you would not get on a ZR the way it runs, or you would not get on a transport bus or go and stand up in the Fairchild Street terminal, sir, and seek to take the bus, we should not be asking any Barbadian to do it. So the sector that we create should be such that any of us would leave our car or bicycle or motorcycle home and get on a bus, because it is that sure, the quality is that high, and we believe in it. So, sir, when we talk about the transport sector in this country, that is what we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about a sector that counts on route schedules, counts on timetables, counts on well-maintained vehicles, counts on a sufficiency of public service vehicles that mean that we are delivering a high quality of service for all Barbadians. We have talked about several things in this sector, including the pedestrianization of certain parts of Bridgetown and perhaps other parts of the country, with a view to increasing foot traffic, but also with a view to increasing commerce in certain areas, with a view to increasing entertainment in certain areas in the north and in the south of the country and perhaps others. We have talked about being able to have shuttle systems so that we don't have congestion in certain locations that we tend to have this kind of congestion, so that we have people who can make use of a park and ride system that will not just allow us to address traffic congestion on the road, but will allow us similarly to create income earning opportunities for people who may want to be involved in such an enterprise of being part of a park and ride system, building car parks and so on, which in itself can generate streams of revenue. So as we consider these amendments and the regulations, which really is where the meat of the matter is, as we consider these amendments to give the Transport Authority more authority, we need to do so in the context of the transport sector that we want to create for all people and what all of these issues are, because we need to make sure that we are using this particular act and any other legislation that may follow to be able to do some of the bread and butter, fine work, as I like to say, that needs to be done in order to improve the sector. So that, for example, if we have in our minds a vision for the type of service, the different streams of service, the experience that we want Barbadians to have, how long should it take you to get to work in the morning? I worked in a country once where the local authority had determined that it wanted citizens to take, on average, 40 minutes on the road to get to their destination. And so what they were able to do was to be able to come up with a transit system that, based on the combination of routes and transfers and so on, meant that wherever you were going in the metro area, that on average it should take you that amount of time. And this was a much larger place than Barbados, but on average it should take you that amount of time to get to your destination in the morning, whether it was school or work or your volunteer group or some other activity. So we need to be starting with the end in mind. What are the first principles? What do we want to deliver to people? And when we know what we want to deliver to people, then we look at the actors, the resources. Yes, we have to make use of these public service vehicles to be able to deliver that. But we also have the transport board system. So whether it is a ZR or a B-van or a transport board bus or any other conveyance, how are we bringing them together into a singular system that gets people where they need to go? Because if we begin to legislate just for one person over here and one sector over there, another group of people over here, we are going to start to build in certain inequalities in the system that really government's job is to avoid, is to make sure we are here, sir, to make sure that we root out certain inequalities that might be inherent in certain kinds of systems. And so I think that this is the place that in all of this that we need to be starting from. And I know that the ministry has plans. I've heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael North-East, the Honourable Prime Minister, make reference to a mass transit authority, as has each Minister of Transport that we've had over the last 5 years. I know that it is contemplated, and I look forward to it. I think that we should perhaps be starting from that place in determining what are the regulations, what is the contribution of PSVs to the overall delivery of public transport as a utility in this country. Because form follows function. If we know the output, the result that we want, the experience that we want Barbadians to have, then we know the form that the different parts of the transport sector should take. And so we have all of these innovations that from time to time we've spoken about in this sector. We know that, and I've seen, that there has been discussion of a cashless system for PSVs, and I gather that this is something that has met some popularity among the owners and operators. But I do think that all of the parts need to speak to each other, because we potentially have a cure for some of these issues through some of the innovations that we've mentioned, but that haven't yet come on stream. So that, you know, one of the things that we've talked about, for example, is the use of technology for surveillance and enforcement. And so the honorable member who led this debate talked about the fact that in addition to having enforcement officers on the ground to see what is happening, we also need to make use of certain kinds of technology. Now, sometimes I feel that we say the word technology because it sounds like it will solve the problem. And we say it before we know exactly what is the nature of the technology and how exactly it will solve the problem. And I forgive my friend, I will ask the honorable member for St. Philip South, is it? I beg his forgiveness in advance for using the agriculture sector as an example, but I have not to this day understood how drone technology is going to help us with some of the crime solving that we need to do with predial larceny and so on in the sector. Because when you go down to define work, you need to be able to gather certain information, you need to be able to engage in certain pursuit, engage in certain investigation. And I think that we have to be careful not to use this word technology or this notion of technology as a catch-all before we understand how this will work. So I hear the reference to technology, but we have some technology solutions on the back burner here already. We have this cashless system that we are waiting to see how it rolls out. And perhaps this can give us an answer to some of the challenges that the honorable member who led this debate identified in her presentation. We also have the potential use of a point system for considering and assessing infractions, traffic-related infractions. We know that there are jurisdictions in which many of us have lived or have visited that use a point system for all motorists, not just those that are responsible for public transport. And so I have a few friends, regrettably, who have had their licenses suspended for undesirable behavior on the road, and they are not responsible for public transport. But the point system says, essentially, that you commit an infraction, you have certain points against you, and when you reach a certain level of points against you, there are severe consequences. Now, the truth is that I think that outside of the public transport sector, this would also cure a lot of our ills for drivers who are often guilty of certain infractions. And when you get to a certain level, I'm sorry, your license is either suspended or if it is significant enough, it is revoked altogether. Because we cannot, sir, a vehicle is a potential weapon of mass destruction. We have to make sure that people take it seriously how they operate these vehicles on the road. And so this point system for addressing infractions is going to be important because it will mean that drivers, conductors, owners of vehicles, and in particular owners who have a responsibility to make sure that the combination of vehicle and personnel that they put on the road is responsible. I will repeat myself. The combination of vehicle, having an adequately maintained vehicle, that's part of it. The combination of vehicle and personnel, driver, conductor, that they put on the road to operate a vehicle and to interact with the public, that they do so responsibly, and that if they do not do so responsibly, that they run the risk of having removed from them the potential to earn that income. Sir, many of us in here have lived life before this. And there's a former dispensation in which I had some familiarity with the PSV sector. And it is not an easy sector to be involved in, I will say that. I think that owners of PSVs walk a fine line where you are trying to keep people employed, so to earn enough revenue to keep people employed, to be able to respond to the public in a responsible way, and to earn income because that's why you're in the business. And so it may mean that from time to time you have to toy with various financial models of how you earn that income. There are those PSV owners who may start out by saying, you have to pay me $400 a day to have my van on the road. Whatever you do, come back and put $400 in my pocket. Now, that model works for some, but there are those who believe that that model means that the men and women who are on the road every day now feel pressured to, no matter what happens, be able to get the base, the $400 plus the profit that they are to make. And we understand the pressure that creates. And perhaps one of the things collectively that we need to consider and to offer some guidance on is what that business model, what that pricing model should be. There are those who would say the conductor gets 10 cents of the dollar and the driver gets 25 cents of the dollar. I've been away from that sector for some time, so I may not recall exactly how it works. And there's an extent to which there may be less pressure felt by the staff and the operators to hustle and to drag and to do all the other kinds of things that may not redound to the benefit of the traveling public. But there's less pressure for that because you know that you count, and the owner, trust me, the owner has an idea of how many people are on that route, on a given route. That you count and you are able to say at the end of the night, this is how many people I got, and this is what I should be paid. So the financial model that you use also affects the approach to the public service. And it's something that we need to consider. It may not be the subject of regulation, but it may be the subject of consultation and advice to those who operate in the sector. And I know several owners who have toyed with various models and say, this one tends, I may get less income in terms of fares on the road, but guess what? My vehicle is better maintained. I have to pay less in maintenance for my fleet, whether I have 1, 2, or 3 vehicles, because the way that this guy goes about the job, when there's less pressure, means that I have to spend less on maintaining that vehicle when the week or the month comes. So there are many things to consider, and that's why I say that we perhaps shouldn't take a piecemeal approach, even though we are trying urgently to make sure that people are safe, and I think we should do that, but that we also need to step back a bit and to consider some of the other issues with respect to the sector. Sir, I have to say that the transparency that is being sought through this legislation is urgently needed, and I think it perhaps needs to go a bit further. I would like to see us, again, as part of a unified transit system, I would like to see, to benefit from some transparency in terms of how routes are awarded, because all of this, I'm thinking, should flow from some vision of how we want to deliver public transport to the public. How we want to make sure there's less congestion on certain routes, how we want to be able to study how many people tend to be using, what is the demand for certain routes and so on. Sir, there was a time when you go in Fairchild Street van stand to take a Route 11 van in the morning, and there's no van, because the demand for the route at the time was so great that the drivers coming in, loading a van, 30 seconds gone. And between 6:30 a.m. and 9 a.m., you're not going to see a line of vehicles waiting to load, you know. If you manage to catch a van at that time, you're lucky. And then there are other routes where the vehicles are just there lined up. So where can we transparently see and understand how these routes are being drawn up? And not only that, sir, who gets to benefit from having a permit on these routes? Because that is where all the obscurity stands for me as a member of Parliament for St. Michael South Central. Having people come constantly to ask me to say, I have applied for a permit. I have applied to have a permit shifted from one route to the other because I don't find it financially viable. I see that man cross there, no record of providing public transport, get a permit, and I seem not to be able to get. Now, I am sure that there are reasons. I know that there are reasons. I believe the public wants to understand the reasons. And I believe that if we had clearly presented the rationale for the creation of certain routes, the number of permits that certain routes attract, that people would better be able to accept no for an answer. It is more difficult to take no for an answer if you think that other people getting it through. Sir, we know the Beijing way. It is more difficult to take no for an answer if you think that the person who applied the same day as you somehow seemed to magically get through, even though you were told that Route 6 got too many ZRs as it is. Route 11 got too many ZRs as it is. Why? I trust that there are good reasons. Perhaps we should have a more transparent approach to making people aware, sir, of the reasons. Sir, I believe that what is contemplated in terms of training of staff and so on is desirable. But I think that there's several moving parts that determine how people conduct themselves on the road, how people operate their vehicles. I think that we have to call on people to be responsible. But I think that there's some opportunities here, whether it be using the cashless system a cashless system as a payment system gives you a great capacity for surveillance and control. Right? So you are able to glean a lot of information. We talk about having a data authority and data mining and all of these things that sound great, but where did data coming from? So if you're able now to roll out this cashless system, you're able to monitor, well, actually how many people are traveling on this particular route and so on. And then you bring all that intelligence to bear on how you deploy vehicles, what is the area that you need to cover. Sir, even as I stand here, the possibilities are really endless, and I think that we are not fully exploring what can be done to have us benefit as much as we can from some of the opportunities that are before us. Sir, I want to say finally that, today in 2023, we have a chance to really leapfrog where we have been and where we are now. I had the great pleasure to speak over the weekend at the graduation for Edison Teachers Training College and to talk about the fact that we are really called on to decide collectively what we want our future to look like. We have a status quo, and there's some things that are part of the status quo that we have to leave behind. And I also want to make this point. I think that there's some matters in which the safety of individuals and the good of the collective has to prevail. As the honorable member who led this debate said, there are interest groups. There will always be. Governance is about managing interests. But our greatest responsibility is to the public of Barbados. Our greatest responsibility is to the people of Barbados, not just to keep them safe, but to allow them to be their most productive selves and to be able to improve and maximize their well-being. And so I don't want us to be shy. I want us to take courage and to understand that we're not just in the business of tweaking. I certainly didn't come to government or come to representation to tweak, to make something 7% better than it was last year. We have the opportunity to really transform, to more than say it, to do it. And there are times when we have to, everybody's not going to get what they want, and we have to make important and clear decisions for the good of the public. So we are not just here on this occasion, sir, to stop a man from driving, although we want that, or to make sure that vehicles are in good order on the road. We are here, potentially in this sector, to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, to ease traffic congestion, to cause people to have greater income streams, to cause people, small businesses, to be more productive. It don't seem like that's what we're doing with this little amendment, but that's what we potentially can do. To cause people to increase their productivity at work, and overall to increase people's well-being. This is not a small matter. And so, sir, I support the amendment that will give the Transport Authority more authority to be more transparent, to be able to enforce regulations. But I also think that the regulations are the meat of the matter, and that whatever we determine that we do, we have to hold owners sufficiently responsible. We have to make sure that the use of technology to which we refer is practical and usable, and we have to ensure that the enforcement officers are as trained as the drivers and the conductors, because you want to make sure that the operators of the vehicles know the law and know how to behave, but also that the people that are causing them to do the right thing also know the law and know how to behave. And with those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.